All right, welcome. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Eric Koss. I am a ministry consultant with Safe Church Ministry. And this is our October webinar on faith leaders and a coordinated community response to domestic violence. Before we begin, please join me in prayer. So Triune God, we thank you that you are with us, that you continue to walk alongside of us, each one of us, wherever we are, whether we are leaders in the church or congregation, or if we are members, or if we are people who've had experiences with abuse or been victimized by domestic violence specifically. And so we thank you that you continue to walk alongside of us amidst all of our different circumstances with your grace and your mercy, and continuing to give us a way forward that shows your compassion and your justice and your grace. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So this is the fifth webinar in our 2021 series titled On Being a Safe Church. If you have not heard of Safe Church Ministry, we are an agency of the Christian Reformed Church, which focuses on abuse awareness, prevention, and response. And in these webinars, we are hearing from a variety of people that are inspiring us to wonder together at how best we can create healthy and safe cultures in our congregations and communities. This is being recorded, and there's also a closed captioning enabled, and you can toggle that on or off on the bottom right hand side of your Zoom window. And also, the director of Safe Church, Amanda, is here with us, and she's helping to host this as well. Amanda, if you could introduce yourself and share a bit of the question and answer part of this webinar.
Sure. Yeah, it's good to be with all of you today. My name is Amanda Bankhausen. I am the director of Safe Church Ministry, and I work closely with Eric and a few other of our staff, Becky Jones and Chelsea Chiavi, and we work in this office in this ministry of Safe Church to, as Eric said, help cultivate safe cultures in our congregations. And my role today is actually quite simple. I'm just going to moderate and facilitate a question and answer period after our guests present and have their conversation with Eric. And so do be thinking about your questions, the things that you want to ask our experts here who are in the room. And you can put those questions in the chat, and I will bring them forward to our guests today, who will then have an opportunity to answer them. So.
Thank you, Amanda. And we have three guests with us that I have the honor and opportunity to introduce. And so first, we have Judy Pearson, who has been the director of the Pearl Crisis Center for over 20 years, which is located in Milaca, Minnesota, which is about an hour north of Minneapolis. So she provides day-to-day management, planning, and leadership at the center, and also establishes and oversees policies and new programming, along with administering standards and procedures related to human resources. And she co-leads the coordinated community response team with Judge Quinn for the DV court in her county. So it's so good to be with you, Judy. Thank you for being with us today. And we also have Glenda Rittenour, who has been the domestic violence court advocate at the Pearl Crisis Center since 2013. And Glenda works with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and assists in filing orders for protection and advocacy in court proceedings, along with criminal justice support. And again, thank you, Glenda, for being here. And we also have Reverend Michael Ten Haken, who has been the pastor at Pease Christian Reformed Church in Pease, Minnesota since 2013. And in 2015, he was asked to be part of this coordinated community response team, or CCR, and in 2020, he wrote the article, The Role of Faith Leaders in Community Coordinated Response Teams for the Resource Center for Domestic Violence. And it's good to be with you as well, Pastor Michael. And so we are so
Thanks for having me.
glad to and excited to learn with you as we hear from your experience and how best we can go forward as the church with care, compassion, and justice, especially with survivors of domestic violence. So Judy and Glenda, could you start us off by sharing a bit more about the Pearl Crisis Center, what you do, how you started the CCR or Coordinated Community Response Team, and how you met Pastor Michael?
All right. Well, thanks again for having us, and hello, everyone. As he'd said, my role here at Pearl is I'm the director, and I've been here for, like he said, over 20 years. So where should I start? Let's see. You kind of talked about my role here with staff management, and I write the grants. I'm the HR person. So I kind of have several hats that I do. It keeps me busy, and I have a great staff that helps run the place, which I'm so grateful for. I'm going to go back a little bit to probably 2014. We met with our county attorney at that time to talk about domestic violence. Cases were not going down. Like, how can we do this together? We need help from everyone, not only the systems people and advocates, but also our community people. Everybody needed to step up and help. So we had a meeting, we talked about it. What can we do at several meetings? One of our ideas was a domestic violence court and creating a team of people around that. And so we invited a lot of community folks. We invited everybody we could think of to join us in our mission. And at that time, the county attorney actually went to Pastor Mike's church. So I believe she invited him to join us, and he graciously did. And we were really excited to have a non-systems person with us. So that was wonderful. And so we really focused on a domestic violence court to hold offenders accountable, plus provide wraparound services for victims of domestic violence. And we modeled our neighboring county of Stearns. They had implemented a DV court several years before us, or a little ahead of the game. So our judges at that time had developed that court, so they were very well aware of how great it was working. So we kind of modeled that. There happened to be a grant from the federal government that was out that would help create a domestic violence court. So myself and legal aid and county attorney at that time, we sat down together. There was some resistance on that, but we charged forward and we wrote it and we got it. And getting a federal grant was one of my bucket list things I wanted to do. I know it's huge and hard, but I wanted to do it once in my lifetime. And so I got to experience that. So that's kind of how that came to be. We got the funding in 2015. We got our team together, started making the policies, how that was going to look. And then we launched it in January of 2016. So that's kind of a little background on how that came to be and how we met Pastor Mike. And he's been with us since the beginning. And it's really great having his insight and his great questions. A lot of times he asks questions that maybe people wouldn't ask. And also he can bring all the information back to his church because he has a whole congregation of folks that he can also pass the knowledge to. So it was a really good fit. So we really appreciate having him with us. I'll let Glenda talk a little bit too on her perspective of that.
Sorry, had myself muted. So you wanted me to talk about just how our role is with the domestic violence court, or?
Yeah, if you could share a bit more about your experience with the Pearl Crisis Center and what brings you here today.
Yeah, so one of the greatest parts of the coordinated community response and the DV court is that everyone is at the table together and from their own perspectives and expertise and knowledge in their area. And as a team, we can really address all the multifaceted issues that come along with domestic violence and sexual assault. And so there's our role as advocates at the table really is also just making sure that the victims' voices are heard throughout the whole process. Because in criminal court, a lot of times the victims are not they're not a party to the case, so their voices aren't always heard. But that's where we come in. So we address a lot of safety issues and do a lot of collaboration. And like Pastor Michael has really filled a lot of gaps, within the systems, or even with services that we aren't maybe always able to provide. And maybe it doesn't fit with what we can do. And I think just having a shared understanding of domestic violence and what that looks like, and as a team, then we're all able to then address the needs of victims, the children who are exposed or experiencing domestic violence as well, and then at the same time holding the offenders accountable. So it builds trust with victims in the system, because then we can say, I know the county attorney and they really care about your safety or whatever. And so it really is a great way to address the needs of victims, and that their voices are heard throughout the process. So
I'd like to just share that you do not need a federal grant to have a CCR. Like, we just got really lucky that we got the funding. But if we didn't get the funding, we still could have developed our CCR and did good things anyway. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Glenda and Judy. And I think for many of us who are on this call, we may not even know what a CCR is. And I think we're going to answer a little bit, I think, a few of those questions. But first, I want to ask Pastor Michael just about his experience. I knew Michael from when we went to seminary, I think in 2012, a little bit in 2011. And when I began to research more about this webinar and how we could talk about domestic violence and what we could do as faith leaders, I noticed he wrote this article, and it just came up on Google, and I thought, this is amazing. And so after reading the article, I thought this would be really neat to have a conversation with you and for others who are part of the CCR. And I'm just wondering if you could share a bit more about how you got started with this team and how it has affected you and your ministry.
Yeah, again, welcome everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here along with Judy and Glenda and share with you a little bit. Yeah, you mentioned most people might not know what a CCR was. I didn't. I didn't know what the term meant, nor most other terms that were being thrown around in the room when I first joined. Judy mentioned I'm kind of a non-systems person, and that's correct. And by that they meant that I had absolutely, and when I say this, I mean it. I had zero familiarity with how the court system worked, especially when it came to about a lot of things, but especially when it came to domestic violence. My experience with the court system was a couple of speeding tickets when I was younger, and that's about the extent of it. And so I have learned so much through this process from people, and the ability to be around the table. And in fact, even just to be included in the conversation was a pretty big deal. That's correct. The county attorney at the time was a member of my church, and they were getting this started, and she approached me and said, "Hey, is this something you might be interested in?" I said, "I don't know. I'll come to a meeting though and check it out." And then I just kept coming because I did find it terribly interesting, and I also found it very heartbreaking and tragic on the other side of it. And I said, "Hey, I need to be a part of the solution here in this." And that's how it really got started. And thankfully they allowed me to be a part of that solution and ask questions and just become familiar with the process as somebody from the outside looking in. So I think through that process, and it's been a long journey, it's been 5 years, that I've been a part of it and learning a lot. And it has opened my eyes to a lot of things about how domestic violence works and some of the warning signs of it and what to look out for and what to do when you suspect it, when you see it. I wouldn't have known what to do before, or certainly, and I maybe would have thought I would have known what to do, and some of those things would have been helpful and some of them wouldn't have been very helpful, I think, in my approach. And so I've just learned a lot from Judy and Glenda and how difficult the court system is to maneuver, and just say, well, just just, talk to an attorney. Well, it's not that easy. It's very complicated, and every state, and in some cases, every counties within states are different in the way they handle these things and so on. It's a very complex process. And so just being able to come alongside people and say, hey, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know how long this process is going to take, but I'm willing to walk alongside you as you go through it, and together to be a help and a support for you. So I've done things like observing DV court, just showing up and just spending some time in the courtroom to just watch and observe how it happens, just to learn a little bit. All of those things have been a part of the journey for me. And I think faith plays a huge role in this. I think faith communities can play a big part in helping not only victims, but also abusers as well, heal from some of the trauma and some of the mindsets that come along with domestic violence.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you sharing a part of your journey of understanding more and how you've integrated that into your ministry as well. And I'll just share as well that about 4 or 5 years ago, I knew very little about domestic violence and the factors involving power and control. And I had a bit of a struggle to wonder how the church can truly be involved. And when I heard about a community coordinated response, I thought this could actually be a really great way to address or to start helping as the church, because oftentimes we don't know much of what's going on as a pastor or a faith leader. And so to hear about something that brings in so many different people around the social network, from the courts to social workers to case workers to if they're juvenile, there's school resources, as well as a host of other resources like the Pearl Crisis Center. And then to have a faith person or a faith-based organization or a church also involved could be a great way to go together for something that is much more systemic, and it's bigger than just the individual. And so I'm wondering if we could just lay out some basic definitions, and feel free to jump in, Judy, Glenda, or Michael. Like, what is a DV court? What is a CCR? What are BIPs? Because I think many of us may be completely unfamiliar. They hear BIPs, they're like, what is that? And I think there was one more. What is the Duluth model? And you don't need to explain thoroughly each of those, but I'm just giving us basic definitions to work with and to understand as we continue to go forward.
Glenda, do you want to do the DV court? Glenda's a DV court advocate.
Yeah, I can talk about the DV court. A DV court is a specialty court that's specifically designed to address domestic violence. At least ours is a felony level. There's various different domestic violence courts across the US, but ours is specifically designed kind of to address kind of like the worst of the worst, I guess you could say. And then using a collaborative response with our whole team. And then we just kind of, there's surveillance officers. We have a probation agent and a sheriff's deputy they're like our surveillance team. So they will actually randomly check up on the offenders who are screened into the domestic violence court. And then as their case goes through the court system, their criminal case, the victims receive services through Pearl. And then also, they also are assigned like a legal aid attorney for free. All the services we can provide for them are free. And then we just help them support them through the whole process. So they may have like financial needs or different things. And so we kind of just work as a team together with the county attorney's office and Pastor Michael, and just as a team to kind of wrap around services. And then as their cases, the criminal case kind of goes through the system. Once they're sentenced, they start what's called phase 1. There's 3 phases and then pretrial, but I won't get into all of that. But so each phase has a set of things that the offender needs to accomplish or do. So there's a 50-hour volunteer project that they must complete. They have to also complete their Betters Intervention programming, which is basically unlearning the behavior. So
Batters intervention program, by the way, that's BIP, Batters
Yeah.
Intervention Program. I had to learn all of this from scratch. So, but these guys throw them around like it's nothing.
yeah, we do. So basically and then once they make it through all the phases of the program, they actually see it. Judge Quinn is our domestic violence court judge, and they see him every Wednesday. We have DV court at 1 p.m. And so all the participants in the DV court have to go before the judge, and they address if they had violations, or if there's any issues, then that's presented to the judge. And then if, like, let's say there is some kind of violation, then the judge would address it immediately if they weren't arrested prior, because some things that they may violate would, the consequence would be immediately, brought into custody. But and then it's an immediate consequence. So maybe they'll have their curfew moved back. They have to subject themselves to random testing, so drug testing. They have to complete chemical dependency treatment. And then generally there is a what's called the domestic abuse no contact order, DANCO for short, but those are put in place to protect the victims or their children. And then that way we can all it's just kind of like a collaborative response. And then again, as an advocate, I may update the victim on what happened in DV court. They can listen if they want. Maybe they want to do a victim impact statement. They can share their thoughts at sentencing. And then they can graduate the program and go on traditional probation once they've completed all the things required. And then as they go through the phases as well, the leniency, or they are checked up on less, or there's, the court gives them more. And what I've seen is really amazing things. I've seen some offenders come in and they just could care less about the court or not taking it serious. And then they end up graduating. And we've had some that have actually helped other people in the community that were maybe victims, and they recognized it. And it gives me hope that we are making a difference and that people can change their behaviors. And it takes all of us. It's not just one person. And some of these people that are in DV court have grown up in homes where they were witnessing abuse or experienced abuse themselves and become then a perpetrator of it or victim. And so I think that it takes all of us doing our part to make it work.
And the incentive to participate in the domestic violence court is you avoid jail time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the carrot, if you will, that gets put out there. While they're going through the program, they are not in custody. They're out. That's what the surveillance techs are there for, to monitor. So that's the incentive, is they stay out of jail. If they complete the program and complete it well, they will not have to serve jail time. So there's good incentive there for them to complete the program and do it well. And our research is just barely getting started, but it's starting to show that the program is effective, that recidivism rates are low. We haven't had, a lot of repeat offenses yet, those kinds of things. So it's already in its very elementary stages, starting to prove effective, but it takes a lot of years to know the results of that. We've been doing this 5 years now, and we just got our first few who are starting to graduate. And so it's going to take time to know how effective it is. But our initial results we're very pleased with and very happy with. I don't think I'm putting words in Judy and Glenda's mouths when I say that.
No.
What I really like about the court, it's really an accountability court. It really holds them responsible for their behavior. And prior DV court, nobody was watching. Nobody was watching them. And so crimes were being committed, and their laundry list of offenses some people was just pages and pages of stuff. So now, it's kind of like children. You must be held accountable for your actions, and our surveillance team is right on it. And every time you screw up, there's a consequence, back to jail. And so some of these guys, they're just revolving. We've had a few women in the court. That's a whole nother discussion. but they're kind of getting it. They just have to be retrained on that, and like, oh yeah, I'm going to get in trouble, and they are watching me all the time. So it really, the CCR is so wonderful in the fact that for all clients, but we can focus on DV court. So like Glenda said, those victims get a free attorney, but we're all working together. We share releases so we can all work together to help this victim, and the victim doesn't have to go siloing around. Like, I have to go there now and then here now. We can all work together internally to help them whatever problem they're facing, so they're not jumping all over hoops and stuff. So it really works great for victims. And
Judy,
one of the big things is that we've built so much trust with each other. Historically, sometimes law enforcement advocates historically didn't always see eye to eye, but we have really built great relationships and trust. Where the meetings first started, they were a little hard. They were, I'm not going to say it was super easy, but now we go to the meetings and we laugh and we get along, and there's not much tension. And so we, made friends and we trust each other. So I'm so happy for that.
And one really quick thing I wanted to point out with, as far as the recidivism goes, or the success of our domestic violence court, a lot of the folks who actually end up executing their sentence and just going to prison, we've actually had a huge number of those reoffending and getting screened back into the domestic violence court after they've been released from prison. And that number is actually alarmingly high, which tells us that, by having the DV court and them working through the program, they're less likely to commit new violent assaults once they're out of prison. So, or when they complete the program. So that's pretty, and some get screened out because of their residency, and those folks as well have been reoffending at pretty alarming rates as well. So it does show that those who do work through the program, and it's not for everybody either. They can choose to just execute their sentence and go to prison, but that is an option really, but I don't know how many really want to do that, but so yeah.
And Judy points out, that, hey, we work together and so on now. And Judy kind of alluded to it a little bit, but that did take a while to get there. What I learned fairly quickly of being in the program is being involved with this group has got their information and their way of doing things, and this group has their information and their way of doing things, and this group likewise. And the idea that we would be willing to change our practices or change our approach in order to be able to share information better with this group and that group so that we're all participating together, that was a very difficult conversation. And it took a few iterations, I think, quite honestly, of eventually getting the right people in the room who are willing to say, okay, I'm willing to change my approach or implement some things that you're saying would be better for me to implement. But just like it would be for all of us, those changes did not come easy. And there's rules and regulations. We're dealing with the law here. You can't just decide to make changes just because you want to. There are requirements that judges need to follow and attorneys need to follow and law enforcement officers need to follow. And so you have to work within all of that. It is a very complex. And what a group like this really needs is a Judy and a Glenda, is people who are so committed to it and say, we're going to keep having these conversations. We're going to keep walking through it.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that picture of the DV court, the community coordinated response. And I'm cognizant that people who are tuning in to this webinar are throughout the US and Canada. And there are a variety of ways that different towns and cities go about the crime of domestic violence. And I'm also aware that I've heard from several different police officers that when responding to domestic violence, it is one of the most dangerous. And I often share that when I'm talking to pastors, especially in regards to a consultation that involves a level of domestic violence, to say, don't rush in, don't try to take over power, especially if the person coming to you is in the middle of a domestic violence situation, whether or not it has become physical, or maybe it's just emotional or spiritual. And so to be very careful and to navigate that with wise words from people from similar organizations like Pearl Crisis Center. And that's where I want to transition over to a presentation that Glenda and Judy and Pastor Michael have prepared, and specifically in response to 3 R's they have identified: to recognize, and then respond, and then refer. And so I think Chelsea will be sharing her screen, and then I'll let you take it away. And then after that, we will be fielding some questions. And so as we already have a few people who are asking questions in the chat, feel free to keep sharing different questions, and then we'll have a pool of different things that we are able to ask as we go forward.
And just for a little context here, this was a part of a presentation that Pearl Crisis and myself did together for local pastors and faith leaders in our community a few years ago. This is kind of a snippet of that.
So these are just some things that from our experience and knowledge as advocates working alongside Pastor Michael, like you said, these are just some things that you can look for or ways that you can help respond, identify domestic violence, that maybe you have people in your congregations that are maybe dealing with a lot of domestic violence in their relationships. And this should hopefully give you some ideas of how to kind of recognize it, how you can respond to it, some ideas to give you, and then how you can refer from there. So recognizing, so some of the more dynamics, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about the dynamics of the domestic abuse, because you guys will all have these PowerPoints too. So for time's sake, but if you have any questions, obviously feel free to ask. So we'll talk about recognizing. I'm going to hit next. So a lot of you are all probably wondering, what is domestic violence? What is it actually? So domestic violence is a pattern of coercion used by one person to exert power and control over another person in the context of a dating, family, or household relationship. So this could include actual or threatened physical harm, psychological abuse, forced sexual contact, economic control or financial abuse, social isolation. So they may try to isolate victims from their family, friends, or their faith. We've seen that as well. They may destroy property, abusing pets, misuse of divine beings or religious beliefs, practices, teachings, and traditions, asserting male superiority, and attributing abusive behavior to cultural traditions. So these can occur in any combination, sporadically or chronically over a period of time. And these are not all of the dynamics, obviously, but they give you a good idea of some of the main ways that somebody may use domestic violence and kind of what it is. And this is the power and control wheel. So inside the wheel, there's different tactics that an abuser will use to get control over the victim. So domestic violence and sexual assault is always about power and control. It's not about anything else. And it is a learned behavior that is reinforced through societal norms. And so basically each of the little pie pieces, this was actually developed in the 80s through in Duluth, Minnesota, and they have a great website too. I can share the website later, but this wheel actually was created by a group of victims in a support group. And these were a lot of common themes that they found throughout these support groups they did for months, and studied this. And this is a very widely recognized tool. It is also used in the BIP or Batter's intervention programming to address the abuse and unlearning it. So, we have intimidation, emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming, using children, using male privilege, economic abuse, and using coercion and threats. So each of those things are ways that an abuser will try to get control. And then if it does not work or the victim maybe resists, then on the outer part of the wheel, that's when the physical violence will occur. So that's how they're able to get them to kind of get back in line, if you will. And we do usually typically see so I will usually refer to the abuser or perpetrator of the domestic violence as male and a victim as female. And the reason I'm doing that and why we use that language is we do recognize that men are also abused, but it's in different ways. Victims, women use abuse differently than the way men do. And so we do recognize that, but statistically women are at experience domestic violence, homicide, and sexual assault at far greater percentages than males. And that's what we also see in our community as well. So domestic violence is a learned behavior. It is not caused by illness, genetics, alcohol and drugs, out of control behavior, anger. A lot of people misuse anger management classes instead of the Betters intervention programming. And that actually is excusing the behavior and making it about this anger issue and not really getting to the root of what is actually causing the domestic violence. And then stress, the victim's behaviors or actions, the victims are not at fault they didn't cause the abuse. And then problems in the relationship or their children, pets, Satan, demons, or other evil entities. So there is no excuse for domestic abuse. And one of the things that we see a lot are victims will a lot of times make excuses. And like even recently, that, oh, well, if they would just stop drinking. So part of our role as advocates too are to help, yes, that's probably making it worse, but it doesn't actually cause domestic violence. So this is just kind of an overview. And if you go to the Duluth's website, they actually have a lot of other wheels. They're in multiple languages. And then there's like a post-separation wheel. There's also the equality wheel, which is the opposite of this wheel. So what does an equal relationship look like? That's a healthy relationship. So go to the next slide. Okay, so this is actually the cycle of abuse. This is basically giving you an overall view of the cycle of abuse. So most often it takes victims 7 to 10 times before they actually leave the abusive relationship. And there's lots of reasons for that. But this is not obviously an exact model for every single relationship, but this is a general idea of kind of how it looks. So in the green stage, that's usually when you first meet the person and things are going pretty great. And, the relationship seems like it's going really well. And then it moves into the yellow stage. That might be where they start controlling the victim more, like, why are you wearing makeup? Or why are you going to go here or there? Or I don't really feel comfortable around your family. I don't think they like me, right? So they don't say you can't go to church or you can't hang out with your family. It's usually like that kind of a tactic. And then something major might happen where then if the victim, like I said, on the power and control wheel, if they are not allowing or try to resist any of those tactics, that's when they may be sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, strangled, or that's usually when we will see victims at our center, or the police are called. Not always, because there's lots of reasons victims don't call the police. And a lot of times when this first incident happens, that's when maybe they may seek a protection order or something. And then it goes back into the green stage, right? Because then the abuser's like, I'm really sorry, I gotta quit drinking, or I promise I'll change, I'll do better. And then the victim takes them back and then it starts over again. And so, and there's no real set time frame. Sometimes some victims will purposefully try to get through the red stage just to get it over with. They feel it building and it's happening. And so then they almost in a sense provoke it or try to get it over with. So and then in this middle, as you can see, that's denial. And both the victim and perpetrators of the violence are in denial. That's one of the most hard challenges helping victims, is that if they, say they minimize or deny that the abuse is happening, there's a lot of shame attached to domestic violence. Most people don't want to be like, I'm in a relationship where I'm being harmed, or they don't think it's that bad, or maybe they were in a worse relationship before, and now this one's a little bit better than that, but it's still not good. And a lot of abusers and victims maybe have grown up and this is what they've seen, this is all they know. So then it just almost becomes normalized. So there's a lot of reasons why victims stay too, because there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on throughout the systems, and so understanding why a victim would stay in that is really important. So some of the obstacles to leaving would be fear, children, denial. They still love their partner. I mean, it's not abuse all the time. Like a lot of people, they're probably really great partners, and then they use violence. It's not all the time. So the victim sees them when they're a good parent, or they are loving. So it makes it very difficult, and they feel guilty, breaking up their family. Maybe they have children. Maybe their religious beliefs don't allow them to separate. They feel like they have to, they're stuck. They don't have any support. They've been isolated from their family and friends, maybe their faith, their church, and now they have no support. That's a lot of it. And they maybe don't have the financial means. Maybe they don't have anywhere to go. Housing is such a huge issue. So there's just so many reasons for victims to stay. There's way more reasons for victims to stay in that situation than to leave. And so, and it's really hard for victims to even reach out for help. Maybe they called the police before and then they weren't arrested, or maybe the charges were dismissed. And so they may not feel like they would be believed, or there's nobody out there that can help them. They don't want to tear apart their family. So there's just so many reasons for them to stay. These are just a few.
We got maybe a couple minutes left before questions.
Okay.
So
I will speed it up.
The do's and don'ts slide, Glenda. Maybe the do's and don'ts quickly. And
so these are just some characteristics and risk factors. So you guys can read that when you get a chance. And then children exposed to violence in the home. I know there's a question on that, so we can address that later. So responding to it. So some action steps that you can take is really focusing on safety. So as advocates, we do safety planning, and I'm sure all advocacy agencies do safety planning. I recommend either having them train you on how to do safety planning, or in some way, maybe you could do that together, or whatever, that would be good. So assessments, assisting and following up, and then with concern to their safety. So you may not realize what you're saying or doing could put them at risk. And then autonomy, letting the victim make their own choices, because they're already being controlled and told what to do. So supporting them in their decisions, whether you agree or not, which is why it's important to know why they stay. And then offender accountability, making sure that, like Pastor Michael is on our team and we have our DV court, and that's just one part of it. And so, and then advocate for social change. So collaborate with other important community agencies and use your position to educate your congregation. You could have domestic violence-based, sermons and different things, and have maybe support a local agency. They can come and speak and share, what their needs are, or what the victims' needs are in your community. And then I'm going to go to what you can say when you suspect abuse. So, every couple does have conflicts. What happens when you and your partner disagree? Do conflicts ever make you feel fearful or turn into physical fights? So these are just some points and tips of things that you can say if somebody reveals to you that they are a victim of domestic violence, or there's domestic violence going on in the relationship. And then, this is another slide that's basically, similar to the last one. So just some ideas of things that you can say when somebody discloses that to you, because sometimes it's hard, you don't know what to say all the time. So these are just some tips on that. And then the biggest thing, we definitely want to go over is the do's and don'ts, because like Pastor Michael, you said, there's sometimes things that maybe before you knew that maybe they were doing more harm than good, but how do you know? So these are just some tips. So things that you can do is listen and believe. every time anyone calls here, it doesn't matter, we believe them. It's really important to believe the victim because it takes a lot of courage for them to reach out. So, and then communicate your concern for their safety. That's very important to break it down to the safety. You know, are you safe? Do you have a safe place to go? And then assure confidentiality to the extent possible under the law. Because if you're a mandated reporter, you know, there's certain things that you have to do that with. And then make referrals. So know the resources, know the agency in your area that you can reach out to and have a working relationship with. And then you know kind of what services they provide and how they can help. And then convey ongoing concern and assure follow-up. So just like, how are you doing? How are things? Is there anything else we can do? And then let the survivor set the pace for action and healing. And it might take a while, remember 7 to 10 times. So that it does take time and it has to be in their own pace. And then provide them with appropriate texts or passages. Sometimes those can be very uplifting, and a lot of our victims say that a lot. They even just a little quote, just to kind of help them get through the day can make a really big difference. And then always make sure to reassure them that it's not their fault. They didn't cause the abuse, and that it's not their fault. And then things that you don't want to do are to ask why they haven't left or why they returned to the abuser. We actually have a lot of family that falls under this, and that's part of the reason why they are isolated and don't reach out again, because that's kind of the messages they're getting. Don't ask them questions about the abuse in the presence of their partner, friends, or family members. That could definitely put them at risk, especially if the abuser doesn't want anybody else to know, of course, right, what's going on. That could put their safety at risk. Don't tell them what to do. Remember, we already talked about that a little bit. They've already been told what to do. And don't react with disbelief, disgust, or anger. And also the biggest one is not to recommend couples counseling. That is like against all the statistics that exist, that because of the dynamics of the domestic abuse relationship, a lot of times the perpetrator or abuser will end up taking over the counseling or manipulating, and it actually can make it worse. And then encourage forgiveness. That's a huge one. A lot of victims aren't ready to forgive or not ready to. Maybe they'll get there down the road. And then also do nothing. Doing nothing, sometimes we feel like maybe we just stay out of it. It's their business. What can I do? I shouldn't intervene. Doing nothing just reinforces it, and it kind of allows it to go on. And knowing that they have support is a big part of that. And then blaming them. Obviously, we don't want to blame victims for this because it's not their fault. And then we also have additional information. Like I said, we could talk about this all day probably. So it's really hard because it's all important. So
yeah, thank you, Glenda, for, especially the do's and don'ts, I think give us a practical, tangible picture that we can really go forward, especially if we're elders or pastors on the call, and suddenly we go, oh, what do I do? And so we really appreciate what you said, and like the encourage forgiveness. I think it's pointed, that you understand the picture of where forgiveness is in this picture, that it's not something that often allows people to be on a journey to actually get them the help that they need. And so I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, and we're going to go through some questions and answers this time.
Perfect. Well, let me just say I was furiously taking notes, and then I realized we're going to get the slides. So how wonderful is that? I just appreciate all the information that you provided. And it's like Eric said, it's so good, so helpful, so practical. I was struck by the one where it's asking the person, are you safe? Is it safe to talk, right? Like even just being aware of their surroundings and how you communicate and get in touch with them. To be conscious of the fact that there might be somebody looking over their shoulder or overhearing or even searching their phone, and screening their texts. So just to be conscious of the danger that the person might be in when you're interacting with them. We have some great questions for you. And the one I want to start out with is about children. Glenda, when you went through the slides, you said, we're going to come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to actually throw this one out to you. The question really is about what, for instance, something like the Pearl, this coordinated community response team offers for children who are in homes where domestic violence takes place. And when the offender is in rehab, it seems to put children at particular risk. And so what resources are on offer to protect children in those situations?
So I know we have, they're called domestic abuse no contact orders. So if a child is a witness to the abuse, they are actually included in that protection order. So that means that the perpetrator would not be able to have any contact with the victim or their children. And then at that time, that's part of with us working with the victims, we refer and connect them with resources to provide services for their children. There are like therapists that come to the schools and can talk with the children. And then we safety plan also. So like when those orders are lifted, then we want to make sure that they have safety in place. So we basically do help connect them to the resources because there are resources for children. So that is a way that we can protect children is with those DANGOs. And then also if child protection is involved too, then they also have their services. So it's kind of like a wraparound.
Right. So it is that sort of coordinated community response coming around, yes. Not just the one who has been victimized in terms of the primary victim, but also the children involved in that who are affected by that situation as well. Yeah.
Yep. We also have a member of our CCR who is who runs a counseling center in town. That's and her specialty is with the children, especially child-informed trauma and that kind of, or abuse-informed trauma and that kind of stuff that she works with. So she's a part of our team as well.
Yeah.
And then they also do have like there are supervised visitation centers where the employees are specifically trained in domestic violence. We don't per se have one here. I mean, I don't know, Judy, is Lighthouse still do that? I know that's a need for sure in our area, but so they make sure as a team, like that's part of the collaborative piece. Like if there is a risk or concern, like that is addressed because we do recognize the children. And like at Pearl, we go into the schools and teach. We have a youth advocate that goes and teaches safe dates. So that's part of the preventative piece. But a lot of the kids are getting that information too. So right. Like, what is it, all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, it's so helpful because it sort of brings it out of the darkness into the light and normalizes the conversation to talk about abuse as something that happens. And if it happens to you, then you can actually, there's more space to even bring that up to others, to your peers, if it's being talked about in the schools, right? So
yeah, and that could even be something that would be great in like a youth group. Doing some that kind of curriculum within the youth groups and stuff as well.
Yeah, one of the resources that we have been promoting is a curriculum called Circle of Grace. And the idea is to empower children and youth to understand and recognize abuse when it happens and to know how to respond themselves, to find a trusted adult who can help them navigate this and put an end to it. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Michael, there are lots of people on this webinar who are curious about your church and that they would encourage or support your being part of this. Obviously, pastors are busy, they're pulled in many different directions. So it's not just you who has to say yes, it's the council and it's the church who have to be supportive of this. And there's lots of people who are curious about how that materialized for you.
Yeah, this all kind of happened by accident. Like I said, a member of a church who asked me, and I said, well, I'll show up to a meeting and learn about it. And I kept showing up. I didn't necessarily ask anybody's permission it was just something I was curious in. My church is very supportive of me being active in a community. We live in a small town, right? And that's part of the reason this can work the way it does is because we all do. I had known about and worked with Pearl Crisis before, so that wasn't completely foreign to me. And I didn't really make a big deal about it. At one point, at some point I said, hey, this is something I want to commit to. And so then I informed my council that, hey, I've been involved with this for a while. And just so you know, I think this is important work and I'd like to keep staying involved with it. And they gave their blessing to that, which I was grateful for. In addition, there have been, so I've gotten involved in some other things where, maybe the congregation at large knows about it or is aware of my work, on the CCR and with the DV court and that kind of thing. I really didn't, there was a question there about if I had to change my church's culture or anything like that. And I really did not, because this church is very much, hey, we want to be a part of the community and we recognize our role. And thankfully, in a small town, we're given a little bit of a presence that we wouldn't normally have because it's a small town. They still don't have like basketball practices and sports practices and stuff on Wednesday nights after 6 o'clock so that kids can make it to youth group and stuff here. We have that kind of a relationship. And so it works really well. And the Lord has seen a lot of things come together in order to make this work for us.
Thank you. If there was, I recognize your situation is unique in that regard, but if you could address a church or a number of churches who are asking, why should our pastor be involved in this? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I don't know, because it depends a lot on the situation. This happened again. This all started because of a personal relationship. But I would say if that opportunity presents itself to you as a church or a church leader, to not shy away from at least being willing to learn something, to go to a meeting, to show up and don't shy away from it. I was pretty green coming into this, and I just kept showing up and just kept kind of putting some of my pride behind me and saying, I'm just going to have to figure this out and start asking some questions. And so I did. Don't be scared of it. And people are very willing to come alongside you and help you. At least that's been my experience. And as the Lord would have it, I think it's helped me in my ministry in a lot of ways. There's a question in the group here about, hey, small towns, there's generally a lot of connections between people and personal connections. How do you navigate that? And absolutely, I've had to navigate that, where it's been, kind of, hey, why you taking her side on this? And, that kind of thing. And, how come this is okay, but that's not? And, all of that. Yep. Having to navigate all of that. Is very difficult. And again, my council's been very supportive of that and being able to walk alongside me in doing that. And I think without my involvement in this group, my responses to some of those things, even some domestic violence situations within my own congregation, I would have handled very, very differently as a result of without my work with this. But yes, I have dealt with this directly in my own congregation. And I think a lot of congregations do, but a lot of it still flies under the radar.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Michael. I'm struck by the repeated phrase, I had the support of my council, and I can see how that would be so very important, even as you're navigating some of these challenging situations in a small town, to have the support and trust of your council in the midst of that, and then to have this larger body within the community who you're working with, so you're not doing it alone and trying to navigate this alone. So,
and I was very skeptical about it. When I first got approached, I'm like, "Are you sure?" But she said, "Yeah, I want to try this," and I said, "Okay, I'll trust your judgment."
Excellent. Well, I think we're about at time, so we're going to bring an end to our webinar this afternoon, but I just want to say thank you to Glenda, to Judy, to Michael, for your participation in this webinar. It's been incredibly informative and helpful and inspiring. I mean, I'm leaving this going with a whole new sense of how we can join together with others in the community to really come alongside those who have been victimized by domestic violence. So thank you for your words and your wisdom, and for sharing those incredible slides, which I know are going to be well used by those who are listening to this webinar. Just to close us off, I want you to know, to all of you who are listening, we're so glad that you have joined us today. We're so glad that you are interested in this issue of how to respond to domestic violence. And we hope that the webinar was helpful for all of you. We want you to know that we're thrilled to be able to offer these kinds of webinars free of charge. And because they are free of charge, you're under no obligation to give anything. But because we found webinars such an effective way of generating awareness about issues related to abuse and of providing training and ideas for its prevention in the church, we want to say to you, for those of you for whom this issue is near and dear to your heart, we would welcome a financial contribution to our ministry. And so I am going to, Chelsea, just put in the chat the link to our website where you can donate if you feel so moved. If you click on it, it will take you to our donate page on our website. And if you're not ready to give right now, that's okay, but would like to give in the future, you can go to that website at any time and click donate, or shoot us an email at safechurchministry@crc.org or crcna.org, sorry. We'd love to connect with you and talk more about these things. So again, grateful for all of you who joined us today, and take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.